Hi everyone. This book review is going to be a very special book review because today is Juneteenth 2019. So I decided to select a children's book about Juneteenth, and that children's book is All Different Now, Juneteenth, the First Day of Freedom. And it was written by Angela Johnson and illustrated by E.B. Lewis, who's one of my favorite illustrators. So the reason I chose this book is I wanted to teach you about Juneteenth because I honestly didn't really know about Juneteenth. The first time that I heard about this observation or this holiday was June 19th, 2011. And I was 21 years old. I didn't really know what Juneteenth was then. I really didn't know what it was now. I did go to a Juneteenth event, but people were celebrating, so I didn't get the chance to really study. And even after that time period, I never took the time to research about it. So this book was a very excellent resource for me to learn about what happened, like why should we celebrate it, and various things. It's very inspiring. So if you are a person that wants to learn about it or introduce your children to it, I would highly recommend this book for you. So let me get into the biographies of the author and the illustrator. So this is a picture of the author, Angela Johnson, and this is a picture of the illustrator, E.B. Lewis. So it says, Angela Johnson is the author of the Coretta Scott King Honor Picture Book, When I Am Old with You, I Dream of Trains, Wind Flyers, A Sweet Smell of Roses, Just Like Josh Gibson, The Day Ray Got Away, Lottie Paris Lives Here, Lottie Paris in the Best Place. She has won 3 Coretta Scott King Awards. In recognition of her outstanding talent, Angela was named a 2003 MacArthur Fellow. She lives in Kent, Ohio. Visit her online at ajohnsonauthor.com. Now I recognize a few of the books listed here. When I Am Old With You, I believe, is about a grandchild and their grandfather. A Sweet Smell of Roses is about 2 children during the Civil Rights Movement marching in a protest march. Just Like Josh Gibson is about a little girl who wants to play baseball. Lottie Paris Lives Here and Lottie Paris in the Best Place. I did not know she wrote that. Like, now that I'm thinking of it, I'm like, oh, yeah, she did write that. But the illustrations are kind of different than the one she usually has. She also has books for teenagers. One book that truly stands out in my mind is The First Part Last, which is about teen pregnancy, and I believe that may be a series. So I'm going to put the link to her website in the description box below. Now, E.B. Lewis. I love his work. Look at this beautiful watercolor. Like, look at this. Anyways, it says E.B. Lewis has illustrated more than 50 books for children, including Nikki Grimes Talking About Bessie, the story of aviator Elizabeth Coleman, Down the Road, My Rose and Piles of Coins, The Bat Boy and His Violin, and Coming On Home Soon. He lives in New Jersey. Learn more at eblewis.com, and I will also put his website in the description box below. Now, out of the books listed here, I recognize My Rose and Piles of Coins. I recognize The Bat Boy and His Violin. My Rose and Piles of Coins, I believe, takes place in Africa, I think. The Bat Boy and His Violin is basically like, it's about a little boy playing a violin and liking baseball. And Coming On Home Soon is part of my children's book collection. I'll have to review it one day so that you can see more of E.B. Lewis's work. But he's a very prolific artist. He's illustrated so many books. One of my favorite books that he illustrated was Across the Alley. And it's about 2 boys during segregation who are different races, and they live across the alleyway from each other, and they can only communicate through their window. And there was a customer that came in one day, and all he wanted was E.B. Lewis illustrated books. And there's just a whole pile of them. But this was the perfect illustrator to choose for this book in particular. So before I get into the book, let me tell you a little bit about the history of Juneteenth. In the back of the book, there's a timeline on the side, important dates, and there is Juneteenth, then and now. Off of the timeline, I'm going to tell you about 2 dates that I feel are very important for this video. So the first date is January 1st, 1863, and it talks about Abraham Lincoln, the president, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, which declares that all persons held as slaves within states that have seceded from the Union are and henceforward shall be free. The proclamation makes freeing slaves the official end of the American Civil War and allows African Americans to enlist in the Union Army and Navy. The Emancipation Proclamation does not end slavery in the United States, but it sets the stage for the constitutional amendment that will. And one thing that sticks out to me about this date in particular is that every single time I read a children's book about enslavement and the main character is enslaved and they talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, the author makes it seem as if everybody is free, as if the Emancipation Proclamation was the 13th Amendment, but the 13th Amendment abolished enslavement. So they're not the same thing, but it did make the way for the 13th Amendment, which did not come until the next year. Or no, yeah, it's like it agrees to add a 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment will abolish slavery in every state. Then 1865 in December, it is ratified by enough states and added to the Constitution. So I guess like 2 years later. But anyway, the next date, June 19th, 1865. So basically, Major General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas, with news that the Civil War has ended. Now, remember, this is literally 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, a year, or a little over a year, after the 13th Amendment was voted on to be added to the Constitution. But he comes with news that the Civil War has ended and all the slaves are free. During the war, Union soldiers could not get past Confederate troops and enter Texas to tell the slaves about the Emancipation Proclamation. Then when the war was over and slavery was officially illegal, plantation owners did not tell their slaves that they were free. As a result, the slaves in Texas did not know they were free until Major General Granger's announcement. This is why his arrival in Texas is known as the day that the last slaves were free and is celebrated as the first Juneteenth. So I've heard a couple of different stories, even about the date of Juneteenth. Some people say it wasn't the 19th. Some are like, well, it was the 17th, the 18th. But they didn't know which day, so they just said Juneteenth. And there's other accounts of like, oh, they did not hear about it because the messenger was murdered on the way, or the enslavers didn't want to tell until the harvest was done, or just various accounts. But we can all agree that June 19th, 1865, that's when I guess it was officially told that you were free. So it mentions how Juneteenth came to be celebrated. So originally it was celebrated within our own community, our own Black community. We weren't waiting for America or the United States of America to add it to the national holiday, just like Kwanzaa. Like Kwanzaa wasn't added till later. Like we just did our own thing with Kwanzaa. The same thing with Martin Luther King's birthday or Martin Luther King Jr. Day. A lot of the time when it's his holiday, people will march to remember the civil rights movement. But we were doing that in honor of him soon after his death. And it wasn't added, I guess, until the 80s. Please don't quote me. Like, if I'm saying this incorrectly, please tell me I'm saying it. But I believe it was put as a national holiday until the 80s. But we were already doing it by ourselves. So the same is with Juneteenth. So it says that the celebrators would play games, they would eat food, and they would wear fine clothing because it was basically discarding their past of enslavement. They no longer wore the clothing of enslavement. And So it says, sometimes white landowners would oppose the celebration by refusing to let their newly freed workers use their property. And so there were Juneteenth celebrations taking place in the 1890s in various places, I guess in Texas or throughout. So it says, during the 1900s, interest in celebrating Juneteenth declined, which I thought was kind of interesting because a lot of the celebrations you'll notice, they'll start around Lincoln's birthday. They'll be in relation to the Emancipation Proclamation, but not really about Juneteenth. I don't know if it was because it was just more prominent in Texas. I honestly, personally, don't know. Okay, then in the 1930s, the Great Depression forced many people off farms and into the cities for jobs. Unless June 19th fell on a weekend, there are very few participants available to celebrate as they had to go to work. So it talks about during the 50s and the 60s, there was a resurgence of this holiday, the awareness of Juneteenth. But that makes perfect sense because that was the whole setting for the I am black and proud, I am black and beautiful, and different things. Like, we don't have to wait for you to celebrate our holidays. We can just do our own thing. So this was the perfect time for it to resurge. And it became an official state holiday in Texas, January 1st, 1980. It says, African-American state legislator Al Edwards helped to increase awareness of Juneteenth. So now it's widely celebrated according to this book. I am starting to see it, like in the past few years, I've seen more people pushing for us to celebrate or observe Juneteenth. And I believe it is very important because our observances, our holidays are important as well. Even if the United States doesn't want to recognize them or just kind of like, okay, whatever, it's just history, whatever happened. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit about this book. So E.B. Lewis, the illustrator of the book, used students from, let me see the school. The people of Spartanburg County School District 7 in South Carolina. He visited the school. He called Rodney Graves, Director of Secondary Education, and he had all of the students, the parents, teachers, babies, preschoolers, grandparents, and the superintendent dressed in clothing that they had researched and provided for themselves, ready to pose for their roles. So these were real people that got dressed up from this county to portray people of African descent who are enslaved that found out about Juneteenth. The words in this book are more written like a poem. Even though it's in story format, it's very poetic. And the illustrations truly capture the feeling that one would have when they found out they were free. Just imagine this. Just imagine for a second. I know most of us cannot get our minds into this situation, especially if we are people of African descent. I mean, we're still really being oppressed globally, but just imagine one day you are literally on a farm, being enslaved, suffering all your life, and then somebody tells you that you don't have to do that anymore. Like, can you just imagine where you're from one experience and now it's a completely new experience? And the illustrator talks about that. He talks about that, the shock, like you don't really even know how to react. Like, I don't know. It says, I watched as my Aunt Laura sang as she held her baby. Mr. Jake, who some say was 100, cried quietly, and a group of grown people bowed their heads and whispered things to each other I could not hear. So look, everybody's reacting differently to hearing this news. And this reaction, that's why I love this book so much, because it actually goes in alignment with what I've read about narratives of enslaved people of African descent when they found out they were free. Some said that they just shouted and just like leaping for joy, and others were crying. Others just walked away in a daze. Just walked away in a daze. Because that's a lot to process. You are literally enslaved by someone. Even though you were born free, they're physically enslaving you, and now you can just walk away. Now, sometimes the people that left the plantation would actually return to the plantation, and they did it for various reasons. Because I didn't understand this for a long time, because I was a child reading these narratives. I'm like, why did they return back? Some were like, they had been so oppressed in their minds, they didn't know any other lifestyle. Others, they had nowhere to go. They had no food to eat. They were about to die out there. There was nobody out there to help them. Another reason is it was more dangerous out there because you had people kidnapping Black people, lynching them. I mean, basically the same thing, but like kidnapping them, lynching them. They don't know where to go. They're looking for their families. That's why you hear of accounts of like Black people walking the streets, looking into each other's faces because they're trying to find their relatives. It's just a lot to process. One of my favorite pictures is this one. It's just them sitting by the beach. It says, Papa, Mama, the aunts and uncles, and all of my cousins had an afternoon picnic by the water. My baby brother crawled around our blanket as we listened to the sounds of the waves. Look at this. But just think about it for a second. Just visualize. Like, what would you do if every day you had one type of lifestyle? And it might not be the lifestyle that you want, but it's what you're living, this current reality you're living right now. And then the next day or the next moment, your reality is completely the complete opposite of what you were living. It just topsy-turvy. It's not the same anymore. I'm not saying like what we're going through now is at the level of what they went through, but the closest I can say without being too traumatic is like when somebody's issued divorce papers, when somebody finds out that their loved one died, when somebody is ski boarding one minute and now their leg is chopped off. Like, it's just, that's how intense this experience is, this switch of experiences. And it's kind of cool that Juneteenth also falls around the summer solstice where everything's standing still. Things are transitioning with each other. In the back of the book, there's also a dictionary or a glossary, and it teaches you words about confederacy, succeed, what they mean. It also gives you online sources that you can go to learn even more about Juneteenth and see photographs and various things. But yes, I highly recommend this book. If you are just trying to find a powerful text to read to yourself, to read to a young person, so that we can always remember what our ancestors went through and how to move forward from that. Let us never forget Juneteenth. I got on my I Love Black History button. So everybody have a beautiful Juneteenth and see you later next week. Bye-bye.